want to be absolutely clear right from the start. I'm taking a big personal risk by sending you this message. I'm not comfortable revealing my name or even the exact world organization I work for, but I can tell you that I serve as an atmospheric scientist for one of the leading intergovernmental bodies devoted to climate and weather research. It's an organization many people have heard of, and we collaborate closely with agencies like NOAA, NASA, and the European Space Agency, among others. Because of that, I have access to data that most people never see. Anyway, I need to describe what's been happening in as much detail as I can. I ask your understanding if this email gets long-winded. It's all connected in my mind, and I think if I don't get it all out, I might miss crucial details that could help people understand the bigger picture. And believe me, this is a big picture scenario. It spans everything from satellite imagery of cloud formation to suspicious government interventions that, in my personal opinion, are hiding something that goes beyond mere environmental concerns. I just don't know if it's alien, interdimensional, or something that defies easy categorization, but it's definitely not normal. First, let me set the stage by explaining how I came to notice these anomalies. Over the last decade, one of the tasks in my position has been to analyze cloud patterns over the Pacific Ocean, particularly in the area from roughly Hawaii to the coasts of California, Oregon, and Washington. This region is critical to understanding storm systems that eventually track inland, providing rainfall, or sometimes too much rainfall, to large swaths of the western United States. We use data from satellites such as NOAA's GOES-17, NASA's Terra and Aqua satellites, and the European Sentinel missions, among others. The idea is to keep a close watch on sea surface temperatures, cloud formation, and atmospheric circulation to improve climate models. Around late 2018, I started seeing some patterns in satellite images that struck me as very odd. At first, they just looked like abrupt lines or sharply defined edges in certain types of cloud banks, especially stratocumulus decks that form over the ocean. These lines were so crisp that they looked almost like someone had sliced the clouds with a razor blade from above. In meteorology, we do see certain cloud formations with sharp boundaries caused by frontal zones, or localized phenomena like outflow boundaries from thunderstorms. But these specific shapes didn't match the usual patterns. They appeared at times and in areas without any storms or front boundaries to cause them. I tried to cross-reference these anomalies with typical meteorological data: wind speed, relative humidity, sea surface temperature gradients, you name it. Nothing explained the neat geometry. Then I started noticing that some of these clouds had these circular, punched-out shapes, something akin to hole punch clouds, which can happen when aircraft pass through supercooled cloud layers, causing ice crystals to form and the droplets to evaporate in that region. But these were bigger and had symmetrical ring-like patterns that didn't match standard hole punch phenomena. Plus, they'd appear in clusters, almost as if they were arranged intentionally in a grid. It was like looking at polka dots across the sky, but on a scale of hundreds of miles. That definitely isn't something that forms naturally very often. At that time, I chalked it up to anomalies in the data, or some unusual but explainable meteorological event. Occasionally, I'd mention it casually to colleagues in the hallways or during coffee breaks, but nobody gave it much concern. Just weird weather, they'd say, or probably some sensor glitch. And for a while, I accepted that. But by mid-2019, these shapes seemed to become more frequent, more varied. Some days, I'd look at the near real-time satellite loops and see swirling patterns reminiscent of fractal art. Other days, there would be sharp, angular shapes cutting across what should have been uniform cloud decks. It felt too orchestrated, too patterned to be chaos. That's when I started a personal log. I figured if I documented everything meticulously, date, time, satellite used, approximate coordinates, size, shape, atmospheric conditions, I might find a cause. Little did I know that this log would lead me down a rabbit hole I'm still not sure I want to be in. But if I'm being honest, it became something of an obsession. I spent countless hours, often late at night, combing through raw satellite data from NOAA class, Comprehensive Large Array Data Stewardship System, and from NASA's Earth data. I developed some software scripts to highlight anomalies, searching for anything that deviated from typical cloud formation patterns or temperatures. One day, I got a ping from a colleague. I won't mention their name or department for their safety. They noticed I was pulling large amounts of archived data and wanted to ask me if I was involved in some special project. I gave them a half-truth, saying I was doing an internal study on mid-latitude cyclones. They seemed to accept that, but they also hinted that they'd come across data that looked strange in the same region. We had a quick chat in the cafeteria, again casual but purposeful, and they confided that they'd seen some readings from a project that measures aerosol concentrations above the ocean. The readings were off the charts in small localized patches, at altitudes where you wouldn't expect such anomalies. They were particularly struck by a spike in barium and aluminum particles, which can sometimes be associated with cloud seeding experiments. Silver iodide is more common though. But these spikes were bigger than anything they'd witnessed in typical cloud seeding or aerosol injection data. Why would anyone be injecting such high concentrations in the middle of nowhere? And these spots matched eerily well with the times and places I'd flagged in my personal log. Mind you, I'm not usually one for conspiracy theories. My job is grounded in science, peer-reviewed articles, reproducible data, all that. But this was enough to prompt me to dig deeper. I correlated the aerosol data with recorded flights from various agencies. I found no normal flight paths that corresponded to those areas, at least not from commercial planes. Military flights often don't have publicly available flight paths, so that was a dead end for me. Around the end of 2019, I started picking up rumors of certain hush-hush programs. You've probably heard the usual conspiratorial murmur about chemtrails or geoengineering, but I encountered documents that hinted at something more targeted. I can't confirm the authenticity of those documents, but they pointed to experiments aimed at not just modifying the weather, but also interacting with the ionosphere or magnetosphere. And that reminded me of the HAARP facility in Alaska, which everyone loves to connect to wild weather control conspiracies. While I've never taken those stories at face value, I couldn't help notice that some patterns in the data lines coincided with high levels of electromagnetic activity in the upper atmosphere. Some of that was gleaned from ground-based magnetometers and from satellites that measure charged particles. It's not proof of anything, of course, but it added another layer of weirdness. As if that wasn't enough, I started noticing something else in the satellite images. Occasionally, along with these bizarre cloud shapes, I'd see small points or elongated shapes that didn't correspond to typical aircraft signatures. They were usually reflective, bright pixels on the visible wavelength, and sometimes seemed to cast a slight shadow on the clouds below, indicating they were physically present in the atmosphere rather than some sensor artifact. These objects would appear in 1 or 2 frames and then vanish. Now, satellites take snapshots in intervals, so something that moves fast can easily appear in one frame and not in the next. But the consistency with which these anomalies showed up right near the weird cloud formations was striking. It crossed my mind to ask if they were some advanced drone or experimental aircraft, but the shapes didn't always look like typical planes or drones. Sometimes they were cylindrical, other times triangular. 1 or 2 times, I could swear the object had a distinctly oval or disc-like form. I'm aware that UFO enthusiasts always talk about disc-shaped craft, so I tried not to jump to conclusions. But the data was the data. This was no random lens flare or compression artifact, not in these carefully calibrated satellite instruments. In late January 2020, I finally confided in a higher-up who I thought might help me make sense of all this. We met in a small conference room, and I showed them a curated selection of the anomalies I'd been collecting. The reaction was off. Instead of curiosity or surprise, I was met with a sort of measured disapproval. They basically said, in an indirect way, that this was beyond my pay grade. They hinted that certain research areas are compartmentalized for national security reasons, and that I'd be wise to focus on my official tasks. That was a real wake-up call. because it told me that I was stepping on some serious toes. After that conversation, I laid low for a while, but I kept my personal log going. 2020 rolled on, and with the global pandemic happening, a lot of my organization's focus shifted elsewhere. We were all working remotely, which actually gave me more freedom to dig around in the data from home. I found the patterns continued: strange clouds, weird geometric outlines, sporadic aerosol spikes, even the occasional odd object in the imagery. But now, I started to notice them in more places: the southern Pacific near Easter Island, certain parts of the Indian Ocean, and occasionally the North Atlantic near the Azores. It was as if someone, or something, was seeding or sculpting clouds on a planetary scale. On a hunch, I checked older archives, going back to the early 2000s. These phenomena popped up here and there, but never as frequently. It really seemed to ramp up around 2017 or 2018. That's one reason I suspect a new technology might be in play, or some ramped-up program. I read about historical projects like Project Popeye in the 1960s and 70s, where the US military tried to induce rain in Vietnam for strategic purposes, and even earlier cloud seeding experiments in the 1950s. But none of those explain the bizarre shapes I was seeing, nor the possibility of advanced craft presence. Somewhere along the line, in mid-2021, I stumbled into a conversation with a researcher from a European agency. Again, I have to protect their identity. They were analyzing anomalies in the Arctic region, specifically focusing on an uptick in noctilucent clouds that seemed to carry unusual chemical signatures. They were mostly worried about the environmental implications, such as methane spikes in the upper atmosphere, but they also confided that they'd witnessed unidentified aerial phenomena on satellite footage, especially near the edges of these luminous night clouds. They had no explanation for what those objects were, but had heard rumors that a hush-hush European military group was investigating it. I found that eerily familiar, given everything I'd been seeing. What truly rattled me was the suggestion that certain officials in multiple governments were aware of these phenomena, but keeping it compartmentalized under the broad umbrella of national security. When you combine that with the patterns I've personally observed, it starts to sound more like a coordinated effort, possibly a global one, though not necessarily in the sense that every government is cooperating with each other. It could be a shadowy subgroup or multiple agencies, each running their own clandestine operations. During the late summer of 2021, I visited an actual field site in the southwestern United States to collect ground-based atmospheric data. This wasn't specifically related to the anomalies. I was part of a team investigating heat waves and air quality near Phoenix, Arizona. But while there, I spoke to some local meteorologists who shared stories of residents seeing unmarked planes crisscrossing the skies at odd hours, leaving behind contrails that didn't behave like normal contrails. Some local Navajo communities told stories about mysterious lights in the sky after these planes passed, and clouds forming rapidly in shapes that looked like monstrous thunderheads, but dissipated just as fast as they appeared. One older gentleman recounted hearing a deep, resonant humming noise late at night and seeing a triangular craft against the stars, silent except for that hum. He believed it was a military craft. Another local claimed that he'd heard from a relative about strange humanoid silhouettes, glimpsed during dust storms, though that might fall into more supernatural lore. However, the linking factor was always these strange aerosol trails and cloud formations. Being a scientist, I tried to approach these field stories with caution, but the fact is, they lined up too well with the satellite data to dismiss out of hand. I started to wonder if the clouds themselves might be some form of camouflage, like if advanced craft or entities were creating or modifying clouds to hide their activities. It's a wild notion, but not unthinkable if you imagine technology capable of altering microphysical properties of the atmosphere. Could it be a form of optical stealth? Or is it simpler than that? Just cloud seeding for some undisclosed reason, with side effects we're not privy to. Around the end of 2021, I noticed a distinct shift in official posture at my organization. a colleague in the communications department let slip that there had been some unusual internal memos referencing public inquiries about odd cloud formations. The memos advised staff to keep public messaging aligned with conventional meteorological explanations, like lenticular clouds, mammatus formations, or rare but naturally occurring phenomena. They even pointed out that certain media outlets were running stories about UFOs and weird skies, and we were to deflect those queries by highlighting known cloud types. It felt to me like a coordinated attempt to keep the narrative firmly in the realm of normal atmospheric science. Then, in early 2022, NASA released images from their Landsat 9 platform capturing bizarre spiral formations near Hawaii. Some of the mainstream press covered it briefly, labeling it as strange but natural, possibly caused by rocket exhaust from a SpaceX launch, or something along those lines. But my own analysis suggested that the spirals were too large, too perfectly formed, and oddly consistent across multiple altitudes. I tried discussing it on an internal message board, but the topic was promptly archived and locked. Normally, free discussion is encouraged, but not in this instance. It was around that point I started considering going public in some manner, but the potential blowback worried me. I don't want to lose my position or jeopardize the collaborations we have with universities and agencies. There's also the possibility that I'm misinterpreting some data. Yet each passing month, the evidence stacks up that something is going on, something that transcends a simple climate engineering program. Which brings me to the possibility of non-human intelligence being involved. I'm not one to jump straight to aliens are doing it, but I can't discount it. The presence of unidentified aerial phenomena in the satellite images, the purposeful shaping of clouds, the rumored sightings on the ground, the possibility of advanced technology operating just beyond official acknowledgement. These all point toward an extraordinary explanation. It could be advanced craft from a covert human program. It could be something interdimensional or even extraterrestrial. I've seen discussions about reptilian shapeshifters or other sensational claims online, and while I won't jump to that extreme, I also can't ignore that some of the sightings talk about entities that don't look human. You might be surprised how many quiet conversations I've had with other scientists who privately admit they think some of these sightings are legitimate, but they're too afraid to speak up publicly for fear of ridicule or worse. In mid-2022, I heard from another contact, someone in the field of atmospheric chemistry, that they'd measured odd isotopes in precipitation collected in remote parts of the southern hemisphere. These isotopes could be explained by volcanic eruptions or cosmic dust, sure, but the distribution pattern didn't match typical stratospheric fallout. They joked that it was alien rain, but when I pressed them about it, they admitted it troubled them. They tried to see if a nuclear test or some rocket stage re-entry might have caused it, but none matched up. It was an isolated event, lasting about 2 weeks, and then vanished. Every time I find a clue, it leads to more questions. Are these engineered events? Are they a byproduct of some other process, like advanced propulsion systems that leave behind exotic exhaust chemicals? Or do they tie into something more paranormal, like portals or interdimensional rifts? I know that sounds crazy, especially coming from someone in a scientific discipline, but I've learned not to dismiss anything outright until it's proven otherwise. Throughout 2022 and 2023, I've continued to quietly track these phenomena. My personal logs now have hundreds of entries detailing everything from spiral cloud anomalies to rectangular swaths of clear air amid uniform cloud decks, where the edges are almost laser straight. I've documented spherical holes that show up for a frame or two and then vanish. Sometimes you can even see a portion of the ocean surface below, as if a column of atmosphere has just been carved out. Could it be some directed energy test, or an advanced satellite-based weapon, or scanning technology? Whatever it is, it's not just me who's noticed. There's a small informal network of researchers, some with backgrounds in meteorology, others in remote sensing, a few with intelligence or military experience, who exchange data on an encrypted channel. The overall consensus is that something is systematically shaping or influencing the sky in certain regions, but the nature and purpose remain unclear. I also want to emphasize the health of our atmosphere as a whole. We already have enough to worry about with climate change, rising CO2 levels, global temperature anomalies, melting polar ice, more frequent extreme weather events. If an unknown group or intelligence is actively manipulating the skies, it could be compounding our environmental crises in ways we don't yet understand. This is one of the major reasons I feel compelled to speak out. The public deserves to know if additional stressors, potentially chemical or radiative, are being introduced into our already vulnerable atmospheric system. Case in point, last fall, I was looking at data from the Mid-Latitude Cirrus experiment, a real project that studies cirrus clouds. There were times when cirrus clouds over the North Atlantic thickened rapidly, then just as quickly disappeared. The official line was that upper-level wind shear and dry air intrusion dissolved them. But the data from water vapor channels didn't show the expected dryness. Also, the timeline was too abrupt, on the scale of minutes rather than hours. Nature doesn't often operate in such a switch-like manner, unless there's a targeted action, like a high-intensity microwave or laser beam breaking up the cloud microstructure. I can't prove that's what happened, but I can't rule it out either. Now, there's another angle I need to bring up: sightings of entities or humanoids near some of these places. I don't have personal experience with that, but I've read credible accounts from field researchers in the Amazon region who've observed strange lights and claimed contact with tall, grayish beings. They said that after these sightings, the local environment changed. Trees had unusual scorch marks. Animals behaved erratically. This might seem disconnected from the atmospheric anomalies, but I no longer believe in coincidences. If advanced beings are operating here, call them greys, reptilians, interdimensionals, or something else, it's possible they're using our atmosphere for reasons we can only guess at. Resource extraction, biological experimentation, or maybe they're trying to mitigate something, ironically. I've heard theories that some ET groups might be trying to stabilize our climate to prevent catastrophic outcomes, though that's purely speculation. One of the oddest tangential stories I came across involved a maritime shipping route near the coast of Chile. A cargo ship crew reported seeing swirling lights descend from cloud cover and hover just above the ocean. They thought it was some advanced military aircraft, but then the lights sank into the water, causing no splash, no disturbance, as if they passed through a barrier. That suggests USOs, unidentified submersible objects. The next day, local fishermen found bizarre patterns of dead fish floating in a perfect circle. Now, I'm not vouching for that story's accuracy, but it was relayed to me by someone who claims to have read the official maritime incident report. It's little pieces like this that, when taken together, paint a picture of extremely abnormal occurrences both in the sky and in bodies of water, leading me to wonder if the entire planet is subject to infiltration or manipulation by forces unknown. Bringing this back to my main focus, the clouds. Over these last few years, the shapes have grown more complex. It's not just linear anomalies or circles. Sometimes I see honeycomb-like patterns that almost look like a perfect grid from a high vantage point. Other times, there are wave-like ripples, reminiscent of undulatus asperitas, but more regular and extending over thousands of square miles in ways that natural wave clouds rarely do. We used to see wave clouds primarily near mountain ranges or in specific atmospheric conditions, but these new wave patterns show up over open ocean with no topographical features to trigger them. Is it some sort of resonance effect caused by electromagnetic fields? I don't know, but it's consistent enough to track. And let me tell you, some nights I lose sleep thinking about this. I wonder if I'm crossing lines by even compiling this data. I wonder if I should destroy my logs for my own safety. But there's a nagging feeling that the public has a right to know. What if our environment is being used like a laboratory by unknown players, human or otherwise? What if the odd cloud phenomena are just the tip of the iceberg, signifying deeper changes at the atmospheric or even planetary level? Then there's the matter of official denial or silence. If this was all innocent research, like advanced cloud seeding to combat drought, why not publicly announce it? We do press releases about lesser projects all the time. Instead, we get stonewalled or told to keep quiet. That only makes me suspect that the truth is bigger and more disturbing than conventional climate experiments. Let me wrap up by saying I'm not claiming to have all, or even most, of the answers. I have data, personal observations, secondhand stories, and circumstantial evidence that, when pooled together, suggests something extraordinary is happening above our heads. Whether it's tied to clandestine military programs, the presence of non-human intelligences, or a collaboration between known and unknown entities, I can't say for certain, but my gut tells me it's not random, and it's not purely natural. My hope is that by sharing what I've seen, albeit anonymously, I can encourage others with more knowledge to come forward. Maybe someone in a different agency has the missing puzzle piece that links everything. Maybe if enough voices speak out, we can force a real investigation, or at least open a public dialogue that's not just shot down as conspiracy. The atmosphere is a shared resource. We all have a stake in understanding what's being done to it. If you decide to share this email on your channel, I only ask that you respect my request for anonymity. I can't afford to lose my position or face potential legal repercussions. Thank you for taking the time to read this. Even if you never make this public, it's a relief just to tell someone who won't immediately dismiss me.